back then, their idea of fit is different than our idea of fit now. Yeah. And so there's not one standard of fitness across the board. It's fitness in regard to the situation. And so what that tells us is that our perception of beauty in regard to purely another individual, like another human individual, is not confined to one form of fitness. It's confined to what we know this person has the means to and what we are accustomed to have the means to. So if we're accustomed to have plenty, we can always have as many calories as we want, then we're going to be more attracted to somebody who also has as many calories as they want, but chooses to reject a good portion of those calories in favor of feeling better or lighter.
What is it that makes something beautiful?
What is it that makes something beautiful? My goodness, that is a big question.
It is.
You can go so many ways with this. What would you say first?
I think that we are biased evolutionarily.
Yeah?
To judge things that are optimal for fitness in terms of beauty, so we can adapt our environment to it.
So then you would probably say beauty is reflected in health, or health gives off beauty to the mind of an individual perceiving it. But then, on the other side of the coin, what would be beautiful about a sunset? A sunset isn't inherently healthy. Or a painting. A painting could represent health of the individuals in it. But what would make a sunset beautiful to us?
The sunset gives you a sense of awe, doesn't it? Of grandiosity, that you are part of something that's bigger than you. I think that's precisely what gives beauty to the sunset.
Is that necessary, though, to have a sense of awe and wonder to perceive something as beautiful? Why does it have to be something bigger than us? Surely that's not evolutionarily helpful.
It is, because we needed to be part of something bigger than us in order to survive. If you were alone, you would die super quickly.
So it connects to some sort of biological need in us to be a part of a group or a community.
Yeah.
So then you're equating a sunset, which gives us a sense of awe and wonder at something that's much bigger than us, to our need to belong into a community of people. I feel like that's a hard connection to make there, no?
It could be the case. I'm not an expert in sunsets.
You're not?
No, I'm not, unfortunately. But it might not be that it resembles something bigger than us and that we or need to be part of a bigger system in order to survive. Is that gives a sense of beauty to it. But certainly in people, you can see that if they have a perfect hair with, I don't know, bright and whatever conditions you consider to be healthy, representative of healthy, like it doesn't have patches that it's lacking hair, you know, that would be horrible.
There's probably a good reason for this as well, but you know, throughout time our perception of what healthy is changed. You know, say like perception of what was attractive way back when. I can't give any, you know, solid period, but probably around like medieval times, you know, or like patristic. The thing that was attractive was, you know, more plump, a bit fatter, you know, whereas now, you know, it's skinnier. It's skinnier. Not everybody's into the same thing, of course, but that seems to be the societal perception. So that could also be a sign of health, not necessarily of the same type of health, but then of the means to have health.
It's a good adaptation to our current situation.
Yeah, because the means to have health back then would mean that you have to have a lot of food, because food was probably more scarce and harder to come by compared to now, where since we have an abundance, the people who are perceived as healthy are the ones who can reject eating or don't need to eat as much. You know, maybe they're healthy because they're self-disciplined, or they're healthy because they maintain their health, you know, purposely, because to be large or overweight is seen as an unhealthy thing today, because we know that now.
Oh, that's interesting. That's like the transition that society is progressively doing towards judging someone who's showing off status as negative.
Yeah.
If you bought a Ferrari, I'm not saying that everyone who owns a Ferrari is an asshole, but people in general would see that as a show off. You don't actually enjoy the car itself. You just want to show off your net worth.
Yeah, it's flexing a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That flexing, that in evolutionary terms maximized sexual selection. The peacock's tail improves their sexual selection, but not their natural selection. But as long as the sexual selection you gain is bigger than the natural selection you lose, you will keep spreading. So now peacocks have huge tails. And the peacock's tail is the Ferrari in humans. You're showing off, hey, check what an inefficiency I'm dealing with. that I still been able to survive and reproduce. And I'm alive, dealing with this huge inefficiency. So that's sort of what happens with fat and lean people. Fat people before were seen as beautiful because that showed having something, but now that's assumed. Everyone has a means to buy enough calories to get absurdly fat.
Yeah.
So that's not anymore something of status. It's of low status now.
Yeah, and so our terms of beauty aren't necessarily biologically tied. The reason why it seems to be the case is because if they're biologically tied, and say, you're able to separate biology from the way that humans live within society and such like that. Like say you just take us in a very pure form and, kind of like subtract our society. You take us in an animal state. Would we be attracted to somebody that's skinny or somebody that's more overweight? And I think that'd be a very tough thing to tell. I guess maybe one would choose somebody who's overweight because it would show that they have access to more resources. But the thing is we can't really isolate ourselves in regard to that because we do live within a society, we do live within a culture, and we have to be able to judge what is healthy or attractive or not based off of what we have within that culture.
And you cannot get to the point of having judgment without having interacted with a society previously.
Yeah.
Are you going to get into a machine that gives you nutrients and then suddenly when you are capable of making judgments, your consciousness is activated, so you start judging things? That there's no way that could happen. So you are always influenced by society.
Yeah. So it is biologically tied in a way, our sense of beauty and maybe wonder. So it's almost like the more fundamental aspect of what beauty is here for us. There's a capability that we have to adapt to whatever our situation or circumstance is. And so the beauty feature in another individual, regardless of, weight, like overweight or underweight, et cetera, is how healthy they are compared to what they have at hand. So would it really be health in that circumstance? Or it wouldn't just be physical health in that sense. It would be also physical health and, say, mental health as well. Because somebody who's skinny today, they are perceived as healthier because they're able to reject eating a lot of calories. Whereas before, somebody was perceived as healthier when they were a bit plumper, which we now perceive today as more unhealthy. And so that person back then, we would say they are unhealthy. And so we're actually not attracted to them, even though they would back then would think that they're healthy. Whereas now we think that the opposite is healthy because they're able to reject this thing. So there's a component of health, not only physical health, but also mental health. And maybe emotional health as well. They're able to regulate themselves well,
But I see health as a means to an end. Health is not the end in itself. It's a means to fitness. If you could be super fit without health, like if you were a robot, you need biological health. You could just get rid of it, just function correctly. Then we will have another standard of health, like your joints have to work correctly in order to function. And you have to be lubricated and all those things. You have to have battery, whatever. The software should be good. But the objective is fitness, and the fitness requires health. So whatever we consider to be healthy, we will seek for it in order to achieve fitness. But if we were able to mismatch health and fitness, we would keep looking for fitness and not for health. But those are, no matter what, aligned.
Fitness and health are no matter what aligned. Yeah. But I think that was exactly the point that I was making, though, is that if we're going off the basis that somebody could be perceived more as healthy, even though they aren't necessarily fit, there's a different component with our mind that perceives something as healthy.
It is fit.
Somebody who is very overweight isn't the same fit as what we perceive as fit today.
Yeah, but it used to be seen as beautiful because it was fit in that situation.
It was, yeah. But do you see what I mean, though? I mean, maybe we're kind of getting at the same point here, though, is because back then, their idea of fit is different than our idea of fit now. Yeah. And so there's not one standard of fitness across the board. It's fitness in regard to the situation. And so what that tells us is that our perception of beauty in regard to purely another individual, like another human individual, is not confined to one form of fitness. It's confined to what we know this person has the means to and what we are accustomed to have the means to. So if we're accustomed to have plenty, we can always have as many calories as we want, then we're going to be more attracted to somebody who also has as many calories as they want, but chooses to reject a good portion of those calories in favor of feeling better or lighter, etc., etc. So there is some sort of interesting capacity for adaptation depending on the circumstance, which gives us fitness, and then fitness gives us beauty. It's rather than just like one set thing of biological fitness.
Yeah, and exactly that thing happened with clothes. Now everyone has the means to buy cool-looking clothes. So no one really looks at your clothes and they are like, oh, that's so amazing. No one cares. Now, there might be Gucci, Prada. There's many companies that gain their sale through the signaling of status, but that's going downwards in comparison to what it was previously, because we assume that everyone has the capacity to buy a normal, in status terms, clothing. So if everyone does, you spending more than the average, it's just like you're not doing the job better. But you did previously, because previously, if you went to the clothes of the high status, those clothes were more enduring, they were better made, but not anymore. The richest person doesn't wear better clothes than I do. Maybe in other terms, yeah, but not in textile quality, you know? Those are mostly the same.
Yeah. It's from the materials that you make clothes to what they represent. That has changed, because say there's a Prada shirt that's not made of gold, and say it's made from the same exact materials as your sweatshirt that you're wearing right now. Then yeah, the only thing that gives it actually more value is to show that this person was able to afford something that is more value. So the value that increased upon it is almost arbitrary. It's just like it's increased just to show that this person can show off a status, that they can afford nicer clothing. And I don't know, maybe the stitching was more intricate, or maybe there is some gold in it or something, like that. Maybe it is actually made better compared to something else. Regardless, say these two things are made exactly the same, but one's designer, one isn't. You could sell the designer for a lot more, solely because of the status that it actually has. And so that's still, the status is what confers upon it to the individual, maybe a higher fitness or social fitness in this sense. A greater means to survive within a society. Since we have adapted to living within a society, the fitness is the greater means to adapt and live within that society. And so if this society values money and wealth, then the greater fitness would be somebody who can afford this status symbol, even though it's arbitrarily higher value. And so that same could be said about physical fitness as well. If the society values a certain type of body over another, then it could be seen as more attractive just because that person has the means available to them to do that. And so say that somebody's overweight just because they don't have enough time. They're always working. They don't have any free time on their hands, and they're living an unhealthy lifestyle. Maybe they can't afford good food, which unfortunately is the case for a lot of overweight people. They can't afford it. They have to eat the cruddy food like McDonald's or something like that.
Yeah.
So they don't have access to these good things. Luckily in Spain, you have good food kind of everywhere, but that's not the case in all the countries.
There's no the gravitational pull of shitty food.
Yeah. I mean, like the quality ingredients kind of seem to abound in Spain a lot more than, I don't know, say the US. Because you can get a tomato in the US that tastes starkly different than tomato in Spain. But it's because that tomato has been changed to make it easier to produce. And so it's easier to buy for people. And so but it's actually unhealthy. It's unhealthier. And so going back to what I was saying, though, like the people who are overweight, it could be seen as they do not thrive within the society that we live in. So it gives them a lesser means to continue their bloodline or continue their genes, or et cetera, which isn't necessarily the case. It's almost like this obscure kind of form of evolution, because regardless, they could still continue their bloodline very well. Not everybody who can't afford a decent meal is just going to die before they're able to reproduce. That's just not the case anymore. Yeah. So you can still reproduce, but it's the residual effect from our long evolutionary timeline of, all right, this person, they thrive, they do well within what we've set up. And this is what we're accustomed to. And this is our environment now. It's our new environment, not something that we were accustomed to in the past. To take it back to what I was saying earlier as well, I find this interesting because the things that we find beautiful, maybe not everything, and I'm still trying to think maybe there are some other things extended beyond this. The connection between a sunset and surviving within a group, I still find a bit tenuous, but I'm sure there's some explanation for it. But It's interesting that we seem to have a capacity to view things as beautiful based off of the environment that we grew up in, that we are accustomed to. It's not any biological need or factor. Rather, it's the biological factor that developed within us that also can adapt. So if our situation adapts, if our society changes, and we grew up in something different, then our perception of beauty will also be different. It's precisely different in the way that it appears to us. Say, I'll use the example of a human being again, like somebody who's lean or overweight. The beauty that we perceive is precisely not due to the difference in their appearance on the outside, but due to their difference, all things considered, of where they lie within the society that we are in. So that's quite interesting, because then beauty also tells us that it's adaptable in that sense. It's adaptable in the same way that we are. If our environment changes, our beauty changes. So then what would be one thing that could hurt this theory? Is there some strand of beauty that has always been beautiful and is beautiful regardless of our society?
Nature.
Yeah. But then even in that case, the way that we perceive nature as beautiful, does it change? Is it different? And this is, I think, probably maybe something that's just impossible to prove. But nature, I feel like, would be my first place to go to as well, because it seems to be the same. We perceived it as beautiful then, we perceive it as beautiful now, and it's regardless of how our situation changes. Because we can thrive in a city. We can think that cities are beautiful, but we still think that nature is beautiful as well. And the more beautiful cities are, the more we tend to incorporate nature within it. So that's like this kind of consistent strand of beauty. That's interesting, because why is that? I don't know. I'll pose that question to you. Why do you think nature is maybe the only consistent strand of beauty that we have, regardless of how our society changes and we adapt to it?
I think it's because it's the thing that has the biggest amount of redundancies possible in the system. Like, for example, we talked about this yesterday. You have two eyes. So the beauty in nature comes from the fact that there's trees everywhere, there's animals everywhere, there's water in many places. It's not as abundant in a city, but in a city, disrupting the system that gets to you the food depends on less factors than in nature. In nature, everything being chaos is peaceful, because there's a baseline of chaos that leads to the sustainability of only the things that can thrive in any situation, or in the situation. Obviously, you can increase the chaos even more and everything would stop and it will become into a whatever extreme hostile situation you could think of. But being so many trees and so many green, it signals that they are doing photosynthesis correctly, that there's flowing water into the trees, that there's animals probably behind those trees or below. The signal, if you stop the growth of trees in a certain place, they will take over soon. Why? Because there's a redundancy. The capacity that the trees around them have to keep growing signals that if one of the parts of the system breaks, that will be taken care of. Not in a city necessarily. If you break some lines of the electric wiring of the city, it will take a few days to repair it. Why a few days? Because there's people capable of changing that fast. But what if those people aren't there? We're only 2 steps away from a catastrophe. If those people aren't there either, because there's something that attacked those people specifically, which is super hard because those are distributed randomly in society. But let's say it happened because of something. Let's say they need a tool and that tool is not available. How long will it take to have electricity in our city? A month, a year, until someone comes with tools from another city? Like, we're super close to a catastrophe. What about in the jungle, somewhere where nature predominates? That everything being so chaotic and so little prosperity being there, that level of prosperity, that small level of prosperity that you can achieve in nature is permanent, or permanent in a bigger range. You have to apply a lot of strain to the system in order to not allow it to keep functioning.
Yeah, like a nuclear bomb, and it just wipes it out and the radiation keeps it from growing back.
And even if that happens in geological timescales,
it'll still come back, yeah. I mean, unless there's like the earth shatters, then it's gone, at least it's gone on Earth. There'd probably still be some residuals, and if those can make it to other planets, where they could grow, then yeah. But regardless, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how close we are necessarily to catastrophe, just because I think that as the world globalizes more and more, then we tend to be connected in a way. And so obviously say the world globalizes, like completely, we're all of one nation and everybody gets along, like, et cetera, which isn't absolutely necessary for the globalization of the world. But let's just say hypothetically that's the case.
Low difference in GDP per capita between the richest and the lowest.
Yeah.
That would be what I would consider to be globalized.
Yeah. Like it all functions together, properly. Let's just say that. But let's say that the thing that allows it to function properly is everybody's access to the internet. Because that's currently what allows it to function properly. Now, if the internet goes, like, poof, or say the internet goes and we can no longer reach each other by phones and we have to turn to radios, which only reach a mile or two, we might be able to do it if we're entirely globalized and everybody speaks the same language, et cetera, et cetera. One person could speak to one person a mile away. They could speak to another person a mile away. It'd be really, really difficult to recover, but we might be able to do it. But say you take all that communication away and you're left with, all right, I can only talk to the people and communicate with the people that are within my yelling distance. Like I would probably maybe maximum like 50 yards away if I have just a crazy yell, like that would be even pretty insane, Then the whole globalized, the whole world would just fall apart because we aren't connected in the same exact way. We would have to return to small communities that rely on themselves and are able to get their food for themselves. Cities wouldn't be able to exist either, because cities would just crumble because they rely so heavily on getting food from miles upon miles away. In some cases from different countries and different continents, like avocados. Some of them come from South America. It's like we wouldn't be able to get our avocados anymore, or some things that just don't grow around here. Yeah, that is interesting. But as long as certain things hold up, say like the internet, if the internet holds up, and I'm no expert on the internet as well, I have no idea what, allows the internet to keep on going, etc. It's this big ethereal thing to me. I have no idea how it works. But if
it works.
Say what?
But it works.
But it works, exactly. And if it stops working, we're screwed. Like so let's just hope that doesn't stop working. But I think that as long as it does work though, and there isn't some climate catastrophe, I think that we aren't as close to grand scale catastrophe as we think. There would have to be some sort of nuclear war, but even if that happened and it doesn't kill everywhere and not everything is dead due to, say, just like a couple nuclear bombs fall in a couple major cities, huge bummer. That doesn't even describe how big of a bummer that would be. But we would still be able to work around it. We could stay out of the zone of fallout. If we have the internet, we could place things on like Google Maps or something like that shows, all right, this is where nuclear fallout area is. Don't pass this point. But we develop roads around it, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like really the main thing holding us up right now is the internet. So if we lose that, we're done. But as long as we have it, it seems like we're not too far away from catastrophe, unless, of course, there are other extenuating circumstances like a pandemic, which actually is so lethal. Obviously, COVID is really, really bad and a lot of people died and it was no joking matter. But say there's another pandemic that's so lethal that right when you get it, you're dead. So it just wipes out the vast majority of the population. Then all systems will crumble. If there are 3 people left in each city, they wouldn't be able to get food shipped from them. They would probably have to move out into the land and, work and get their food and such like that. So obviously there are extenuating circumstances, but all things considered, if things continue going the way that they are right now, it really seems to me like the only step towards major globalized catastrophe would be if the internet stopped working. Otherwise, there could be smaller catastrophes here and there, unless there is a global-wide phenomenon which wipes out many things or incapacitates a lot of things. But I think we saw with COVID that even though many people were staying inside and it was a seriously like global phenomena, but we were still able to adapt and we could still keep things going. We could communicate to everybody, stay inside, you can't go outside. But the necessary things that we needed, electricity, food, like agriculture, etc. Those processes kept on going. All the other ones, like theaters or, going to Disneyland, obviously those things shut down. But yeah, I don't know. I think that if the internet shuts down, we're screwed, but otherwise we seem to be in a pretty good position here.
Well, it depends. There's a book by Toby Ord called The Precipice. It basically talks about the permanent losing of human long-term capacity. And for example, the COVID was the mildest it could have been to be taken seriously. If COVID could have been like 1,000 times worse.
Yeah.
And the incubation period could have been larger. The symptoms not existing, it could have had a mortality rate of like 50%, like Ebola, or like crazy stuff could have been the case. And if this hasn't been a wake-up call to, hey, there's something going on that's wrong. If a pandemic worse than COVID appears naturally, that it could happen, we're not prepared for it. And I'm not even talking about engineered pandemics, because if you engineer a pandemic, you can specifically design it to maximize spreading. And you're not going to put it in one specific point, as the one from Wuhan started. You could put it in New York subway, at the same time in London, at the same time in California, in so many places simultaneously. And you could put it through the ventilation way, like everyone takes it simultaneously. That would be catastrophic. And if those people have 2-month incubation period, how are you going to react to that? There's no way to react to something like this. And we're not prepared for it. And we have these diseases. Those diseases are created and are preserved in some super secure laboratories. But if COVID hasn't been the wake-up call to bettering our systems to being able to deal with a more serious thing, I think that nothing will.
Yeah. I think that if something like COVID happens again, it would have like, I don't know, some people think, conspiracy theorists, they think that, all right, it was engineered lab, it was, given to us by China, but that doesn't make any sense at all, because China also relies on, I can't say this for sure, but I know that the economy is globalized enough to the point where if one major country starts failing really, really, really badly, or a few countries start failing really, really badly, then everybody's going to be affected by that. Of course, we could all just go back to being agricultural societies and we wouldn't rely on the global economy anymore. I'm saying this in regard to, say, there was a weaponized virus. That wouldn't make sense for a country to use that.
It would.
Well, it wouldn't make sense because, say, one country sent it to another country. If they did their job properly enough, then since the world is so globalized already, and they're not just sending it to a country where nobody can leave and nobody can enter already, then it will necessarily spread everywhere, unless the country that sent it to the other country just shuts themselves off right when they send it.
Or vaccinates their own people before no one has detected the disease.
Yeah, gosh, that'd be a way to do it as well, for sure.
But what the conspiracy theories say,
still, at the same time though, even if everybody's vaccinated, it would just destroy the whole global economy. Anybody who wasn't in on this plan, you'd have to get so many countries to be in on it to get to vaccinate their people. Then it would still destroy the global economy, anybody that it takes out. And since it's a virus, and if they manufactured it to be infectious and highly highly, mortal, then it just does not seem there'd be any good outcome that would come from that for anybody. If the point of the world is to be globalized, and we can see now that a globalized economy is quite a good economy. It allows for greater human flourishing than we've ever had before. So it doesn't really make too much sense to be able to do that.
It does. The conspiracy theorists would say, this is not the thesis I support. I really don't see why China would create this voluntarily. Like there's many other ways to gain.
And they suffer just as much as everybody else in this.
Not in relative terms. They lost in absolute terms. They are worse off than before, but they are better off in the ranking, in status terms. So maybe if they were trying to increase their status, that would be justified, but I really don't think so. Because if you had 2% odds of being caught, you wouldn't really do it. Because that's such a high cost that I don't really think that the people mandating in China were so crazy to say, we don't care about these 2% odds of getting caught. Because if they did get caught, the cost would be so crazy and so high that there's no way they could survive that.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is an engineered pandemic. Maybe it is, but the lab leak would have been accidental.
But what I was responding to before not was, can a country do this to increase their status to their rank? Yeah, that could happen all the time. Countries could create minor, viruses which somehow affect the whole global population more so than it affects themselves. Say that could happen. But what I was responding to before was, it's in nobody's best interest to create a catastrophe, to end the globalized economy, to ruin the world.
This is if you only seek for status.
No. Because if you ruin the global economy, I mean, and you kill basically everybody on Earth through one virus, then yeah, sure, you're the only one with status because there's nobody left. But that would greatly affect the well-being of your entire country as well. I mean, maybe you could move out and take over the entire world, you know, but it doesn't seem to be the best interest for everybody because they would also have to work a lot more and there would be less places to go visit, you know, less places to go be a tourist to, cultures would be wiped out. It's not in the best interest for anybody to wipe out the entire world just for status. Of course, there are just insane people who maybe want to just do that, like a mad person, you know, but they would have to be literally insane to think that's it.
You're assuming rationality in their part, but that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. I mean, hey, you know, if we don't assume rationality, then anything goes. You know, I could just say that's totally fine. What I was responding to was, is it in the best interest for somebody to affect the entire world disproportionately to themselves, and maybe it causes a catastrophe in the entire world except for themselves? If that was the case, rationally speaking, it makes no sense for somebody to do that. If they're insane, sure, you could say anything would make sense to an insane person. You could say that they should kill every third person. It would affect everybody. And they could also just say like, all right, actually the way that the world's going to become better is by killing my entire family. The person who's insane saying kill my family. Like, that's just stupid. You know, you could say anything about an insane person. So I have to assume rationality because that's the only way I can actually make an argument. Obviously there are different variables like insanity involved, but you know, when we're talking hypotheticals, it doesn't really make too much sense to claim an insane person because of course they're out there, but they make no sense to me. They make no sense to you.
Okay. So. And how is insanity correlated to ugliness, or what's the opposite from beauty?
Oh, yeah, good. Take it back to the beauty question. How is insanity? I don't know. I think that insanity is necessarily unappealing to somebody who sees it. Say you're seeing somebody with a psychotic break. They cannot function within society. So basing it off of what we were talking about earlier, somebody who's insane to the point where they can't hide it, or to the point where they don't seem like they function well within society. You know Ted Bundy?
No.
You know who that is? So he was like a serial killer in the US, like around probably 50 years ago? Maybe something like that. I'm not totally sure. I'm going to get the date totally wrong. But regardless, there's this guy who was a serial killer. He was very charming, you know, good at luring like women to be with him, and then he would murder them. So from the outside, yeah, he seems very appealing. He seems like he does fit well within society. But yet at the same time, he was insane. I guess it depends on what you mean by insane. In vulgar terms, I would say he was insane. In psychological terms, he didn't seem to be a psychopath in the sense that psychopaths break from reality. And so he seemed to actually be well grounded within reality. I think he was a sociopath is what they deemed. He seemed to be well grounded in reality. He knew, you know, how to function within society and such like that. But he also didn't care about functioning within society. He didn't care about the implications of killing somebody or et cetera, et cetera.
It's like being drunk.
Yeah. Being really, really drunk to the point where you don't care about killing somebody. Because being drunk, you lose your inhibition, sure. But you're not just going to go around and start killing somebody. But it takes a greater psychological incapacity or just like difference than what is the norm for society, for someone to think it's okay to just murder people. Their capacity might be just as good as anybody else's. Like Ted Bundy seemed like a smart person. He seemed like he was charming. He knew how to socialize, etc., etc. But there was a change within him, which was so different that he perceived the common morals of society to be very different, according to him. So insanity, if you take it as presenting, you know, like say I can perceive insanity. So we remove the Ted Bundy situation. I can perceive somebody has broken with reality, or they are very well close to. Like just a crazy person, you know, like your common crazy person you see on the street. That I would say is very presentably not appealing. I don't know if I could say ugly, but it's just definitely not attractive. It's not appealing. Somebody who is insane wouldn't be appealing to the average individual within society because there's no fitness there. They can't present mental health, and so they're not healthy, if we're going on our theses before. But if you have a Ted Bundy, I don't know if I could properly call that insanity, or if I could have to just call it a difference in thinking, which does not function well within society. But he could thrive within society very well, but be very morally corrupt. So yeah, it would depend on how we define insanity. But the common insanity of craziness, I'd say that's very unappealing.
Insanity is different from the average, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess this is how I just define common insanity. I would remove the Ted Bundy example. I would say he's not insane. I'd just say his mind is entirely different, but he still functions very well within society, or at least he can if he chooses to, which is more dangerous than other types of insanity. Other, types of differences within the mind, if I'm not saying he's insane. But if we take a very vulgar sense of insanity, like someone who's clearly hitting their head against a wall, or, there's something in their eyes when they look at you, they're like wide-eyed, and, they're talking about things which just have no coherent sense or logic behind them. And those people, I think, would be unappealing, unless, say, you're caught up in a cultish ideology to where anybody who shares those same feelings or shares that same reality with you, even though the reality itself is attached, because there can be a communal psychosis. There can be groups of people where their reality is detached from what reality is. And that's what reality is an entirely different question. But say there's this cult, they think that the world is one way, they all think the world is that way. One cult member to the another cult member could be very appealing to themselves because they see the world in the same way. Their reality is the same. But to everybody else who perceives reality one way compared to them, say their reality is very different the way that we see the world, they would be starkly unappealing. I'd say they're very, very unappealing. But they could be appealing to each other, which goes back to what we were saying about beauty before, is it adapts to our environment, adapts to what we see, the way we see the world is. So
doesn't that point out moral relativity being true?
I don't know if it would point out moral relativity.
If everyone can see different things as beautiful.
Yeah, but does beauty necessitate morals? Does looking at a painting necessitate that it was moral?
No. In the same way that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, morality might also be. So if morality is, and it only requires you to be in order to have a morality, there's not inherent thing that points out to a correct morality. It's like the naturalistic fallacy. The only thing that justifies the existence of this morality is the existence of it. That's it. There's nothing behind it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's somebody who, say you're looking for a partner or something like that, and this partner is the person that you're currently dating. Say that person is just like morally repugnant to you. You just don't like their morals or their values. They wouldn't be attractive to you. And you probably wouldn't be attractive to them because you have very different values. I think that people present their morals and values in a very physical way at certain times, just through the way that they interact with the world or treat a waiter, etc. Yeah, and so these people could be unattractive to us, but correlating morality directly with beauty, I'm not sure if one is contingent upon the other. But I definitely think that in terms of attractiveness, yes. Because this could get us into the question of, can you separate the art from the artist? Say an artist which is morally repugnant to us, say Hitler. Hitler was an artist. He made some beautiful paintings and they actually look quite nice. I totally disagree with Hitler's whole entire thing. I mean, clearly I think as most people would. But his paintings were quite pretty. I actually quite like them. If you saw them and you didn't know they were Hitler's, you'd be like, that's a really nice painting. So did his morals go into the painting? No. A lot of art morals don't have to go into it. But the question comes to, can you separate the two? Like, can you separate the art from the artist? That's a different question, so I guess I don't need to go there. But as long as morals aren't interwoven within the painting or the book or the story, etc., then yeah, you could perceive something as beautiful. But if morals and etc. are interwoven with the artwork, which I guess the next question would be, can they be inseparable in an artwork? Can an artwork be purely beautiful and not relate morals? I would say yeah. I would say that you can look at a picture of a sun and think that's pretty and not be like, all right, I shouldn't kill my neighbor. Or I shouldn't drink more drinks than I should every single night. It doesn't seem to relate, it doesn't seem to relay some of that information to me. I don't know. What would you say? Would you say that morality is contingent, or beauty and morality are contingent upon each other, that they affect each other and they're inseparable, or what?
I think this is similar to what happens in markets. Price and value can be separated for a while, but in the long term, they will tend to converge. So there can be a mismatch between what is beautiful and our morality right now, non-adaptative morality, that the one that Hitler had. National Socialism is not the correct ideology, but he could have an adaptive sense of beauty. He was really good painting. So, but in the long term, those tend to converge, and whatever is not adaptive in one way will spoil the other one, or the one who's correct and that represents reality in a better way will purify the other one. But not necessarily in the same person. Maybe it requires 1,000 generations. The next generation of Hitlers might have inherited the values and the capacity to build art in the same way that he did, and that they would have like one layer of reflection over the values and the art. So they will be like, oh, is this compatible with this thing? Seems like this thing is not compatible with existence of humanity. Well, they actually were. If the US didn't exist, I think actually Germany would have been able to win the Second World War, so maybe their plan would have succeeded, and all the East, the vital space that they wanted to conquer from Russia, the USSR, they would have succeeded if that wasn't the case. So if they had succeeded, would we be able to look back and say that that was nasty? I don't think so. I think that saying now that Nazism is nasty doesn't have any value, because that's the assumed standard.
Assumed standard for most people, but it's not for everybody, unfortunately.
From the majority, there's like a consensus. Not 100, but probably 99 point a lot. So if you are positioning yourself with the majority, you could be a coward, or you could be saying the truth, but there's no actual proof of work. There's nothing behind those words. It's like saying I'm feminist. Okay, yeah, that's fine, but everyone is. Who doesn't want women to be treated correctly? That's obvious. So I'm not really saying anything that could be seen from my interior. I'm not saying something that no matter my exterior, I'm going to keep saying it. I'm just saying it probably. It's not distinguishable, because I want to be accepted in my society. But I wouldn't say that if I was in a Nazi society, you know? Would I be able to say that Nazism is a nasty ideology if I was part of Germany in the 1944? I don't think so. I would just shut up. I wouldn't be able to do those showings of, hey, this ideology is a shit, because I wouldn't have the support around me. Would I be proud, or not proud, but would I have the balls to do those statements publicly? I highly doubt it. I'm not the kind of person that would do that. I know that I don't have the courage to do that. I would just shut up. And we should be aware of that most of the people wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it definitely takes some self-reflection to actually be like, all right, where would I stand in this? But also, I think that in your scenario, if you can self-reflect and be like, all right, if I was in Nazi Germany and I would have just shut up, I think that your simple act of self-reflecting and knowing that about yourself would actually put you further along to be like, all right, you would be in a greater position to speak against it. Because I think that most people that were swept up with it and did shut up with it about it were people who didn't self-reflect about what they were doing in regard to the situation. So I think that your act of self-reflecting actually shows that you would be more likely to go against it and do something in some small way. Because if it was happening, and well, this is a different question. We don't actually necessarily need to get into this, but that was just a random thought. I think in regard to feminism, like you were saying before, it's like, yeah, everybody wants, women to be treated equally. Everybody wants everybody to be treated equally. But then the good thing with these movements generally is that for some reason or another, they aren't treated equally. And so there is still this residual kind of like, people can assent to this consciously. Like, yeah, you go to some guy on the street and you're like, do you want everybody treated equally? Sure. And then maybe he goes throughout his day and maybe doesn't treat women equally or doesn't see them equally.
Okay.
Regardless if he consciously assents to that or not. I don't really know how we got here, but
the proof of work, the actual proving of you put your money where your mouth is. It's not just empty words. I would actually act on this if it was necessary. How do you prove that? By spending the money, by buying the Lacoste sweater.
Or making the plans.
But the plan is just a promise. Is it credible? Is it a credible promise?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess if you were a person of your word, you know, and you're you're the most trustworthy person ever, you know, you make plans, you stick to them, you know, but different scenario, it doesn't matter. Keep on going.
The way that people prove their work when it comes to Lacoste or high status things is that you know that I had to spend the money in order to gain this or to have this. But you more or less get that those people have a high net worth, but the only point of reference that you have is that they are one Lacoste sweater less rich than before. You don't know what's their total net worth. And that's the way I judge those things. Since from the moment I realized this, it's not that the person with a Ferrari is richer than the person without it. It's that the person with a Ferrari has a Ferrari less of net worth than the person who doesn't. But this is not 100% true, because the person who bought it had the resources to buy it, and the person who doesn't have probably doesn't have the access to buying it.
But you also look at Warren Buffett, you know, like I'm not sure if he still does, but he was driving like the same, like, what was it, like a Honda Civic or a Jetta or something like that for years. He totally had the means, you know, he was totally fine. But I see what you're saying though. It's not always apparent. Like say you have two people, they have the same amount of net worth. One bought a Ferrari, the other one doesn't. So one actually does have less than the other.
That's the only way to get the information from what's the expected net worth from the other person. There's not a way of me signaling to you that I have a high net worth without showing off.
Yeah.
So if that's the only, there's other ways. We could talk about shares and what investments I've made.
Or just have your bank statement with you everywhere.
Yeah.
Just hand it out to people.
A certificate.
A certificate, yeah. Hey, look I've got like $5.
That could be a way of doing it, but that's so explicit that you're losing status because you're seeking for status explicitly.
Yeah.
And you have to do it implicitly in order to achieve it. Because people will point the finger at you and will say, this guy is trying to achieve status. And that's an explicit comment on your seeking of status that will make you lose status. And the people who are pointing out to your seeking of status will learn it, which is contradictory.
Yeah.
But what I was saying is that you've got to do the investment. And if you don't have a way of signaling, you will have to do an investment that's inefficient, buying the Lacoste sweater, because there's no other way you can signal having high status. And if there was, people would stop doing those inefficient investments, because the Lacoste sweater, I could argue, is not better than another one that's a tenth of the cost.
Yeah. How do you tie this back into beauty?
Beauty is a lot of times non-adaptive because it seeks to maximize sexual selection and not natural selection. It seeks to maximize your attractiveness to mates or to mate or to people who are around you, but it doesn't maximize the surviving of the species. It maximizes the survival of your genes. Something similar happens with the Ferrari and the Peacock's tail. That's maximizing sexual selection. And so that's not maximizing fitness. It's maximizing fitness in relative terms.
Yeah, in relative terms to the society. But even that can be faked, like in the Ted Bundy example. You know, so he wasn't the fittest person in regard to the society that we seem, but he was able to mask that. So in that situation, he's similar to the person with the Ferrari who actually has less money now than the other person who has just as money as he does, because he was the one who bought a Ferrari to show off his net worth. So there are ways to mask yourself to seem fitter. I think that's why it's said in some relationships, or it's said in mature relationships, the people, you know, they have good character, they're honest. You know, our society values loyalty, honesty. Well, I mean, you can't say that it values loyalty and honesty as a whole, but generally those are praised as like the good things, you know, within society. Even though most of society, you can look good within the society without doing those things. And actually you could do the opposite of those things and still look good and look like healthy. I'm doing air quotes here, healthy within society, and just mask yourself to seem like you have these things when you actually don't.
And the person who's not able to do the masking is uglier than the person who actually does. If you see someone who's a serial assassin, but he's being able to mask it, even if you know what he does, you consider him more attractive or more beautiful than the person who doesn't.
Yeah.
Because the person who doesn't is not only signaling to you that I'm a horrible person for the things I do. I'm also incapable of self-reflecting, and I'm not aware of how useless I am as a person. I'm useless and I'm not aware of that. And not being aware gets you one layer more of uselessness. That's amazing how useless you can become for not being aware of anything.
Yeah. So I guess we could say that our concept of beauty is based on the concept of fitness within society. Wherever our environment that we grew up in, it doesn't have to be a society. It could be, a more animalistic thing. Maybe we're not in society. Maybe we don't have any brain function, but fitness is based off of the environment that we're accustomed to. And the environment that we're accustomed to at the moment allows individuals to fake their level of fitness relatively easily as well. Makeup is one blatant example of that, which I'm not against makeup. I don't think makeup's bad. But it's just, or buying a Ferrari, there are things to mask how fit you are.
And the tragedy of the commons happens here. Because you use makeup, I have to use makeup to keep up with you.
Yeah.
And if we both stopped using makeup, everything would be better. But no, we have to assume that cost.
Yeah.
That's like marketing. That's like signaling status. It's horrible.
Yeah. So since our vision of what's beautiful is based upon our environment, if our environment carries with it imperfections, then our concept of beauty also carries with it imperfections. Because imperfections in the sense that you can perceive something as beautiful in regard to a portion of our environment says is beautiful, but then also not realize that what you perceive as beautiful is actually just a mask and isn't actually beautiful. So it's interesting because our environment carries with it the ability to make yourself seem more desirable when you are actually much less desirable.
So you can always make it one step more complex in order to be ahead of the other person. I'm aware of your awareness of your incapacity to be a normal person. So that makes me perceive your masking. But maybe if you're aware of my awareness of you being aware, you can make another masking. So you could cover your whatever you have done. So even like, okay, I have the first masking and I'm giving a good facade of I'm a good person. And this person knows how bad I am. So that person knowing that you're aware of his reality can create another facade. And you can always make it one step more complex.
Yeah. If somebody is able to facade themselves enough, then they could be the most attractive person, every single thing that our society values. But then in reality, they are exactly the opposite of everything that we value within society as fitness. Say they eat horribly and they're just so unhealthy, physically, but then they're able to use a lot of makeup. They're able to get like